reclusive elementary student pilots a robot from his room, enabling him to interact with people and rediscover the power of friendship and love. After a tragic car accident, Satoru wakes up in a hospital where he sees that the doctors have failed to revive his mother, Sayuri. A year later, Satoru, who is confined to a wheelchair, attends elementary school by piloting a robot created by his father, Kaoru, who works at Overlord Electronics. On his first day at school, Satoru's classmates bombard him with questions about his robot. Realizing that the robot's legs are made of hinoki wood, the class calls the robot Hinokio, a play on Pinocchio. Shortly after, the teacher assigns Hinokio the seat beside Jun, who seems displeased. As Hinokio descends the stairs to their music classroom, Joichi and Kenta position themselves on opposite ends of the stairs and pull a string, causing Hinokio to trip and fall. Once Hinokio's on the ground, Jun reveals herself to be part of the mischievous group. Unbeknownst to them, Sumire witnesses the bullying. During class, while everyone practices on their flutes, Hinokio pretends to play one. When class is over, Joichi suggests that the robot play the drums instead. As Hinokio plays, he impresses everyone with his drumming skills. As Hinokio walks home, Joichi, Kenta, and Jun follow him. Unbeknownst to them, Hinokio overhears Joichi and Kenta talking about a game called Purgatory that can be accessed through a hidden entrance in the Cyber City game. After Hinokio enters the house, the bullies peep through the window and see him changing himself. From his room, Satoru turns the robot off. In his bedroom, Satoru backs away from the robot control console and proceeds to the kitchen to get some snacks. Suddenly, he hears a message from his father, who asks him how his day went. Out of curiosity, Satoru plays Cyber City and manages to find the entrance to the Purgatory game. When he registers for the game, he declares his father among his dislikes. As Satoru plays Purgatory, Kaoru knocks on his door to call him for dinner. However, Satoru, who's still bitter toward his father, doesn't respond. He then finds a flute in the game and uses it against the enemy. After playing the song, the curse is lifted, and the creature transforms into a woman named Eri. The next morning, Hinokio speedily solves math problems on the board, impressing his classmates. As Hinokio returns to his seat, Jun puts thumbtacks on the chair, but to the student's surprise, the robot doesn't feel any pain. Shortly after, Sumire notices that Hinokio has a crumpled piece of paper on his table, which turns out to be a note from Jun, inviting him to come to the shrine after school. After dismissal, Hinokio heads to the shrine and follows the arrows, causing him to fall into the bully's trap. Afterward, Joichi, Kenta, and Jun reveal themselves and use their water guns to drench the robot. As a result, Hinokio's head starts emitting smoke, prompting the bullies to leave. Nearby, Sumire witnesses what happened. As Hinokio ascends from the hole, he finds a flute and follows the bullies to an old warehouse to return it. While Joichi, Kenta, and Jun are trying to fix a broken TV, Poppy the dog starts to bark and the bullies fear the robot seeks revenge. However, Hinokio plays the flute, causing him to imagine a result similar to that of the game. The bullies turn into kind people and tell him that the curse has been lifted. However, Joichi interrupts his playing and grabs the flute. Suddenly, the television sparks on fire, prompting the bullies to douse the flames with water. Shortly after, Jun notices that Hinokio has left the warehouse. That night, Satoru continues to play Purgatory, where a winged enemy takes Eri away. Suddenly, the hanging bridge breaks, causing Satoru's character to plummet into the river, where he encounters demonic entities. Out of frustration, Satoru pauses the game. Meanwhile, Kaoru prepares a drink for his son, but Satoru only communicates by slipping notes under the door. After seeing the note, Kaoru reminds his son to talk to him directly, and encourages him to keep trying to recover. The next day, Sumire exposes Kenta's group for bullying Hinokio. However, when the teacher asks Hinokio, he denies the bullying, which leads the other students to tease Sumire for having a crush on Hinokio. Before dismissing the class, the teacher reminds them about their upcoming Japanese and math retests. Meanwhile, after being humiliated, Sumire looks disdainfully at Hinokio, cooking up a sinister plan. On his way home, Hinokio encounters the bullies, who let him join the group because he didn't tell on them. Afterward, they task him with shoplifting some seasoned squid from the grocery store, but he ends up stealing a whole box. Because they can't eat it all, Jun decides to use the remaining seasoned squid as fish bait, but they don't catch anything. The next day, in PE class, Hinokio notices the mesmerizing Eriko and gets distracted. During their track and field exercise, the robot falls while running, eliciting laughter from his peers. While Kaoru works at Overlord Electronics, a chatty robot that Yuko controls brings up Satoru and mentions how both he and his son are evading their problems by running away. At home, Satoru spends his birthday watching an old video of him celebrating his birthday when his mother was still alive. After turning the television off, he looks at his dad's note with a reminder to heat the stew before he eats it. Out of frustration, he swats the food off the table. The next day, Hinokio joins Jun and Joichi in the warehouse. However, Kenta isn't there because he's hooked on playing Purgatory. When Jun invites them fishing, Joichi excuses himself because he has to study. While fishing, Hinokyo reveals that he's only experienced catching fish in computer games, which Jun thinks doesn't count as real fishing. When Jun teaches the robot how to fish, he catches a boot, making Satoru laugh from his room. Then, Jun brings up Eriko, so Hinokyo denies admiring the beautiful student. Suddenly, Hinokyo gets a bite from a seemingly large fish, prompting Jun to help him pull it out of the water, only for them to find a half-bitten fish at the end of the line. Suddenly, some upperclassmen approaches the pair and demand the robot help them steal things. While Jun asserts that they're going home, the upperclassmen start attacking the student, prompting Hinokyo to defend his friend. After he takes them down with ease, Hinokyo and Jun escape. Moments later, the upperclassmen approach Sumire, who hired them to hurt the robot in exchange for money. However, the student refuses to pay them because they hurt Jun, who wasn't part of the agreement. That evening, Jun takes Hinokyo home, notices the robot showing interest in a robot figurine that Jun's late father once owned, and offers it to him. Hearing this, Hinokyo shares that his mother passed away in a car accident. As they talk, Jun shares the strained relationship with her father, but doesn't remember why. Jun lies in bed and wonders where people go when they pass away. In response, Hinokyo shares that people who pass away go to purgatory first before going to heaven. When Jun wonders if her dad went to heaven, Hinokyo offers to help her find out. When Jun realizes that he's talking about the purgatory game, Hinokyo shares that the game has a link to the real world, pointing out that he saw her flute in the shrine. He adds that the towers outside the window resemble those in the game. Meanwhile, Kenta, who's still hooked on the game, uses his character and requests for their Japanese and math retest to be cancelled. Before Hinokyo leaves, Jun gives him the robot figurine and reminds him to meet on Sunday so they can catch the huge fish. On a rainy Sunday, only Jun and Hinokyo end up fishing because Joichi and Kenta are too busy playing Purgatory. While fishing, Jun asks Hinokyo what's so interesting about the Purgatory game, but Satoru confesses that while he acknowledges the Purgatory concept, he doesn't really believe in anything. Suddenly, Jun catches the huge fish, but its weight pulls the student into the water. When Hinokyo sees a huge fin and Jun's cap, Satoru frantically controls the robot to dive into the water to rescue his friend. However, Hinokyo ends up sinking and Jun saves him. In the warehouse, when Jun takes off her wet outer clothes, the robot's eyes zoom in on his friend's chest, realizing that she's been a girl all along. Suddenly, smoke starts emitting from Hinokyo, prompting the worried Jun to shake the robot, but Satoru explains that the machine is just shorting from the water that leaked in. Shortly after, Jun admits that she doesn't like her feminine body because it's defiled, but the robot disagrees. Satoru then shares that he hasn't left his room since the accident, which is why his father made a robot for him. Satoru mentions that all he sees out his window is a smoky chimney and admits that he doesn't enjoy his way of life. Shortly after, Jun carries Hinokyo and leaves the robot outside Satoru's house. When thunder claps, the frightened Jun suddenly hugs Hinokyo and asks Satoru if he likes her. As Satoru's heart beats fast, he affirms and touches his body as if feeling Jun's hug. The following day, Kaoru and Yuko repair Hinokyo. When Yuko notices the robot figurine, Kaoru immediately asks her to put it back because Satoru will notice, and his colleague confirms that he really is scared of his son. When Kaoru notices that Hinokyo is activated, he requests that Yuko wait in the car so he can talk to his son in private. To communicate with Satoru, Kaoru admits they're both still hurting from the accident, implying that talking about it can help them become closer as a family. He adds that if Sayuri was still alive, she wouldn't like what's happening to the relationship. Hearing this, Satoru finally responds through Hinokyo, blaming his father for his mother's demise, and says that he'll never forgive him. Meanwhile, Jun arrives home only for her mother to introduce her new boyfriend, Shibata. However, Jun visibly disapproves of this and locks herself in her room. To fix the robot, Kaoru brings Hinokyo to Overlord Electronics. Yuko admits that she overheard his conversation with Satoru and is bothered by what he said. Kaoru recounts his final moments with Sayuri before the accident. He reveals that they argued earlier that day, explaining why Satoru was bitter towards him. Though Satoru spoke rudely to him, Kaoru is thankful because it's the first time his son has spoken to him in a year. That night, Satoru controls Hinokyo in the office and secretly installs the sensory force feedback system into the robot's software, which will allow him to feel sensations through Hinokyo. The following morning, Jun attends class and notices that Hinokyo is absent. She then overhears Joichi telling the other classmates that Kenta, who's also absent, requested for the retest to be cancelled in the Purgatory game. Interestingly, a substitute teacher comes in to inform them that the regular teacher isn't coming in today for personal reasons, meaning their retests are cancelled. Later that day, Kaoru brings Hinokyo home and touches its face, causing Satoru to feel it too. While in class, Jun notices the chimney that Satoru sees from his window, prompting her to visit her friend after dismissal. Unbeknownst to her, Hinokyo is at the warehouse and being tickled by Poppy, which Satoru also feels from his room. Suddenly, Satoru hears the doorbell, but he refuses to acknowledge Jun's presence. Nevertheless, Jun informs him of Kenta's unhealthy obsession with purgatory, warning him not to fall into the same fate. On her way home, Jun spots Hinokio at the warehouse and immediately hugs the robot. As they walk on the street, Jun proposes to set Satoru up on a date with Eriko the next day. The next morning, Jun gives a note to their teacher, informing her that she'll be transferring schools because her mother has a new husband. She asks her teacher to keep it a secret until she's gone, and then she requests to go camping with some of her classmates. At the campsite, Satoru is mesmerized by the view and an ant walking on the rocks. As they eat their meal, Hinokio charges his battery while Satoru drinks juice in his room. That evening, Sumire invites Jun to light fireworks with her, but Jun takes them and rushes back to Hinokio, angering Sumire. Shortly after, Jun introduces Eriko to Hinokio and they light fireworks and stargaze together. While doing so, Satoru imagines himself with them and then gazes and smiles at Jun. As they walk home, Jun asks Satoru if he can visit his house, asserting that she wants to meet the real him. However, Jun points out that it's their last chance to meet, but doesn't reveal the reason why. Undeterred, Satoru declines her request to meet up. Enraged, Jun calls Satoru out for running away and acting like he's the only one who's ever been hurt. Then, Jun punches Hinokio's face, tells him to stay a shut-in his whole life, and then runs away. Feeling the impact of the punch, Satoru touches his face. Later that day, Jun heads to school to collect her things. When she sees her flute, she puts it under Hinokio's desk. Shortly after she leaves, Sumire gets the flute from the desk and plays it. Meanwhile, Eriko tells Hinokio that Jun won't be joining them at the amusement park. During the ride, Eriko asks why Satoru uses Hinokio, and he explains that he's still rehabilitating. Afterward, they sit on a bench, and Eriko admits that Jun was the one who asked her to go with him. Then, Eriko reveals that she can't refuse Jun's favor because she owes her life to her. When she was having a hard time at home, Jun gave her life-changing advice. Instead of encouraging her to try harder, she told her to just party with her whenever she felt overwhelmed. Later, when Eriko asks Hinokio about the real him, Satoru feels uncomfortable. The next day, the teacher announces Jun's transfer, which shocks everyone. Shortly after, Sumire, who had been researching the previous night, hands the teacher an article that Overlord Electronics is developing robots for the military, implying that Hinokio is a threat to humanity. When Satoru zooms in on the article, he imagines the robots at war. To prove that Hinokio responds aggressively to threats, she urges her classmates to throw things at him, then incites her classmates to tell him to go away. Overwhelmed, Hinokio rises from his seat, leaves school, and calls his father. Meanwhile, Kaoru reveals to Yuko that Satoru was bullied in school after his accident, and the doctor said his legs would heal with rehabilitation. Ever since then, he's encouraged his son to keep trying to get better. However, Yuko explains that the expression "keep on trying" is tough to hear, implying that it would be easier if no one pressured anyone else to do things they didn't want to. Suddenly, Kaoru receives a call from his son, accusing him of developing military robots and using him as a guinea pig. Satoru adds that Kaoru has Hinokio under surveillance and prioritizes the robot's safety over his own son. Before he hangs up, Satoru decides that he doesn't need the robot anymore, prompting Kaoru and Yuko to take action. Quick on their feet, Kaoru and Yuko locate Hinokio and try to get where he is. On the road, Yuko notices that the sensory feedback system has been installed in Hinokio's system, which means that if the robot is in danger, Satoru will be at risk. Meanwhile, Satoru positions Hinokio by the tracks and recalls his last conversation with Jun. Then, Satoru controls the robot to step onto the tracks to purposely get hit by the oncoming train, resulting in the robot's destruction, rendering him unconscious. Discovering what Satoru had done, Kaoru immediately breaks down his son's door and calls an ambulance to get him to the hospital. Just as Kaoru takes Satoru to the ambulance, Jun, who's slipping a letter into their mailbox, witnesses this and immediately follows them to the hospital. In the hospital, Jun overhears the doctor's uncertainty about Satoru's condition, prompting her to think of a way to save her friend. On her way home, Jun encounters Joichi and Kenta, who confront her for not telling them about her transfer. When Jun is surprised to see Kenta back in the real world, the gamer reveals that Joichi requested his release when he played the game. Hearing this, Jun realizes the link between the game and real life and recalls the chimney tower that Satoru mentioned, prompting her to climb the tower. As Jun ascends the ladder, her friend reminds her about the flute song that she needs to play to make a request. When Sumire hears this, she immediately follows Jun to hand her the flute. On top of the chimney, Jun plays the flute and prays for Satoru's safety. Meanwhile, Satoru experiences a cardiac arrest, and the doctor tries to revive him. In his subconscious, Satoru finds himself recalling his good memories, while his body flatlines. Then, Satoru encounters Eri, who gives him a key to purgatory. When he uses it, he finds himself in his house, where he sees his cake on the table and his mom beside it. Finally seeing his mom for the first time since the accident, Satoru hugs her tightly, not wanting to let go. When Sayuri tells her son that his father loves him, Satoru refuses to believe her. causing their surroundings to change into the game's landscape. As he hugs his mother, she advises him to try and forgive his father. When Satoru expresses his desire to stay with his mother, Sayuri explains that as long as he remembers her, they'll always be together. She then says her goodbyes and sends her son back to Earth. Meanwhile, an earthquake occurs, causing June to fall off the tower. Fortunately, the rescue team's fall protection equipment catches her safely. When Satoru finally awakens, he finds his tearful father next to him, who's been holding his hand while he was unconscious. Satoru then shares that he met his mother in purgatory and she told him about his father's love. Later, Satoru reads June's heartfelt letter. To finally meet and formally say goodbye to June, Hinokio, controlled by Kaoru, carries Satoru and runs alongside June's train, enabling him to say goodbye. Years later, Satoru is no longer bound to a wheelchair, confidently venturing into school without the aid of a robot. As Satoru exits the campus, a familiar voice echoes behind him, and when he turns around, he's face to face with June. Finally reunited, they reignite their friendship with a warm handshake.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.